20. Charity, Part 1. 20th century man has had a very different view of himself than his forebears have had. First of all, especially since the Renaissance and Enlightenment, many among Western men saw themselves in terms of Greco-Roman humanism. In Shakespeare's Hamlet, we see Hamlet say concerning man, "What a piece of work is man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, and yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me, nor woman neither." Act 2, Scene 2. This statement represents Hamlet's bitterness that man falls so far short of what he is said to be. It reflects a late Renaissance perspective. A contemporary of Shakespeare, George Chapman, wrote a play entitled Bussy d'Amboise about a Frenchman of a noble family. A flamboyant character who, when quite young, murdered a Huguenot cousin during the St. Bartholomew's massacre, Bussy offended many important people and was in time himself murdered. Chapman may have had private sources of information in writing his play. In the play, the dying Bussy is dismayed that he is not immortal and declares that he will complain to God about it. "Is my body, then, but penetrable flesh, and must my mind follow my blood? Can my divine part add no aid to the earthly in extremity? Then these divines are but for form, not fact. Man is of two sweet courtly friends compact, a mistress and a servant. Let my death define life nothing but a courtier's breath. Nothing is made of naught, of all things made, their abstract being a dream, but of a shade. I'll not complain to earth, yet but to heaven, and like a man look upwards even in death." Act 5, Scene 4. Such thinking reflected the views of the Renaissance Neoplatonists. Although set back somewhat by the Reformation, this view returned with the Enlightenment, although now it was reason which represented the divine and a humanistic view of man. With modifications, this view persisted through the 19th century. The second view of man, which has been and is influential in Western civilization, has been the biblical doctrine of man as created in the image of God, a fallen and depraved being since Adam, and redeemable only by the atoning work and regenerating grace of God through Jesus Christ. Because of Adam's sin, all mankind fell into the estate of sin, misery, and death. In Christ they are restored and enabled to bring all things under the dominion of Christ the King. In the words of the Westminster Shorter Catechism, Answer 26, "Christ executeth the office of a king in subduing us to himself, in ruling and defending us, and in restraining and conquering all his and our enemies." End quote. The view of Renaissance and Enlightenment humanism has given way to that of modern humanism, a suicidal view. Although prior to Freud, many thinkers spoke of man's subconscious mind, Freud rejected this concept in favor of the unconscious, which is not so much a repository of the conscious mind, but a basic and primordial primitive element in man. Man, instead of having a relationship through his mind with some kind of divine power, was now seen as essentially related through his unconscious with ancient and subhuman motives, urges and drives. The mind, or reason of man, instead of being godlike, was seen as governed by primitive motives and racial instincts. At the same time, the deprecation of man's personality, which had begun in Karl Marx, was furthered by John Dewey. For Marx, man was not the creation of God, but of economic forces, and could be regenerated only by the economic reorganization of society. This was a radical devaluation of man, who, from being the maker of society, became its product. From being a sinner, man was now one sinned against. John Dewey insisted on the prior value and importance of society as organized into a state over the individual. The intrusion of the individual into the problems of society was, for Dewey, usually invalid. Thus, he said and spoke of his assertion as a truism. We all know how demoralizing charity is. Dewey made this statement by contrasting being employed versus receiving charity, not by contrasting charity to welfarism. Only so could he view his statement as obviously true. Then, because of his false contrast, Dewey could insist on the state control of production and distribution, of wages and conditions of living, and more. He insisted on a guaranteed right to work, a minimum wage, and the control by the worker of his industry. Quote, these three things, then, seem to me the essential minimum elements of an intelligent plan of social reorganization. End quote. He called for not a planned society, but a, quote, continuously planning society, end quote. He spoke of, quote, the cult of individual success by means of individual effort, end quote, as against the reality of social planning. The social nature of the individual was basic for Dewey. God did not create man, and man, for Dewey, did not create society. Man was a creature of society, as was religion. If what society organized into a state does is of essential value, and what man does as an individual is not, then it follows that welfarism is very important and personal, and religious charities are either unimportant or bad. At the very least, there is a moral devaluation of what the person does. John Keeks, a professor of philosophy and public policy at the State University of New York, Albany, New York, wrote in 1987 on, quote, benevolence, a minor virtue, end quote. Keeks did not enter into a discussion of the state versus the person. Instead, he simply discussed benevolence as a moral act. He said of morality, quote, morality requires us to act for the good of others, end quote. This definition makes clear his humanism. For a Christian, morality is to do the will of God as set forth in his law word. As a result, for Keeks, the question is, quote, who are the others for whose good we are obligated to act? End quote. As against the Christian and utilitarian views that benevolence must be extended, quote, to all human beings, and that the best hope of doing so lies in fostering benevolence in moral agents, end quote, Keeks says, quote, my purpose here is to argue that this view is mistaken. Benevolence is not a particularly important virtue, and fostering it to the extent that many, but by no means all, Christians and utilitarians find desirable is fueled by sentimentalism and risks immorality. There is no good reason why we, as moral agents, should be benevolent towards the vast majority of mankind. To insist that nevertheless we should be benevolent is sentimental. End quote. To an extent, Christians can agree with this, but why is benevolence a minor virtue? Keeks follows Enlightenment thinkers in viewing benevolence, quote, as a basic human disposition, end quote. It is, quote, a natural virtue, a basic, a given element of human nature, end quote, one which in most men overbalances the selfish traits. Clearly, Keeks does not see man as fallen. For Keeks, neither limited nor generalized benevolence are, quote, particularly important means to the good of others, end quote. There are several other motives which lead us to seek the good of others, quote, a sense of duty, justice, decency, personal ideals, prudence, the desire to avoid guilt or shame or some others. Hence, although benevolence is a virtue, it is only a minor one, end quote. Keeks nowhere tells us what a major virtue or whether a major virtue exists. Whatever Keeks's personal beliefs, his framework is not surprising. It is a modern, non-theistic perspective. If God is missing from a philosophy or a faith, the framework of thoughts will be either radically individualistic or anarchistic, or it will be equally emphatically statist. For the statist forms of humanism, all major virtues are statist, even as for philosophical autarky, all man's thinking is important and moral when it is rational. Charity is devalued in terms of either outlook. In terms of our modern worldviews, charity is either a denial of the individual's autarky or an interference with the policies of state. Christian agencies are accordingly treated with hostility unless they become recipients of state funds and limit their status by stressing humanistic concerns rather than the gospel as they function as minions of the state. The question is one of priority. To whom is the question addressed? To whom the challenge? And who is my neighbour? Luke 10:29. In the Bible, mercy is always personal. It begins with God, and it manifests itself through the people of God